expert systems with applications, AI, etc. So, Dr. Bikas, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Upasna, for the nice introduction. Hope I am audible to all of you. In case if you are not able to hear me, please let me know.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay. So, welcome all. So, hope you had a wonderful last two sessions. So, as I am aware that in last two sessions you had gone through basic of deep neural network. There you had you had gone through layer, hidden layer, neurons, and then how to do forward propagation, how to do backward propagation, and how to calculate gradient and all. So in this session, I'm going to talk about few of the tips that I would like to share here, which you can use while you are implementing deep neural network. This is the outline of my today discussion. So initially, I will start with neural network parameter, and then I will talk about parameter and hyperparameter, and then I will talk a few of the method using which you can set your network parameter, and how then further I will discuss how bias and variance trade-off will be useful while tuning your hyperparameter of neural network. And there comes your while tuning the parameter, you may come across a phenomenon like underfitting or overfitting, then how you can use regularization technique to avoid this overfitting problem. Then I will talk about batch normalization, like this one of the useful technique you can use while implementing your deep neural network to avoid internal covariate shift. And then sometimes while calculating gradient, you may come across vanishing and exploding gradient. So there I will share few of the tips you can use to avoid this phenomenon. And then at last I will talk about these two gradient optimization. One is gradient descent and other one is mini batch gradient descent. So hope you had gone through this figure in last session. So this is one simple neural network architecture where you have input, that is one image is given as one input here. So for simplicity, as I am talking about this basic architecture, so this has been converted into one feature vector of size 1 cross 256. So this is one column vector. This is your input, and this input has been passed to your neural network having many internal layers and many neurons at every layer. And based on this input, you are going to get some output in the sense like if this image contains 1, then you will get like y1 probability will be maximum, and then like if it is 2, then y2 probability will be maximum. So to train this model, there are few things that you are learning here. Like one is, I can say, your set of model parameter. So some set of weight that you are learning at every layer, some biases that you are learning at every layer. So these are, I can say, these are going to be a model parameter which you are trying to learn. And in order to learn this model parameter, few of the things that are provided by user, or the few of the parameters that are user defined, these are basically your hyperparameter. Some few of them are like how many layers will be there in this network, how many neurons will be there at every layer, what will be the maximum number of gradient iteration, what will be the learning rate, what are the activation functions that you can use. So these are the user defined parameters that you have to provide initially to learn this set of your model parameter, that is your weight and biases. So in some sense, you can think that these are the user parameter or user defined parameter is going to control your model parameter. So now your question is like you have to set your parameters at theta. So your theta is just like it is like I'm using theta to denote all these parameter or your model parameter. So you have to learn this, like this training means you have to learn this set of parameters in such a way that if input is in this form, this y1 has the maximum value. Similarly, if input is in this form, then y2 will have the maximum value. So now the question comes, how we are going to set this set of parameters. So how we are going to set, or how we are going to set this few set of parameter, how we are going to learn this, and how we are going to set this parameter or hyperparameter. So if you take this one, like if you take this figure, if you see this figure, there are few things that we are doing here. One side we are training our model, where we are trying to learn our model parameter. And in order to learn this model parameter, few of the parameters that has been tuned previously has been given, or that we are tuning few of the parameters here. And once we have tuned, we got this base parameter, and this base parameter is getting passed to this model. So, and then finally we are learning this model with whatever base parameter that we have passed from here. So in this process, in this training process, we are learning our theta. Or theta is collection of like your weight and biases. And for to learn this, few of the things that we are passing, like number of layer, number of neuron, and all that we are passing, or we are tuning previously and we are passing to this. Further, we'll consider this example. So in this example, you can see that there are two set of points. One is blue point, one is green point, and we are trying to learn a line here or a decision boundary here. So if this is 2D, so consider that we are trying to learn a decision boundary in the form of a straight line. To learn this straight line, few of the parameters, that model parameters that need to be learned. Like for a straight line, we need to learn this coefficient and as well as the constant term. So I can say that this coefficient and constant are going to be your model parameters. And if you are having multi-dimensional data set having more than 2 dimensions, then like if you have to learn this one line or straight line equation, then you need to have 2 feature one line. So now from this set of feature, how many feature or which of the 2 features that we have to use, that is going to be your hyperparameter. So as I said previously, so this hyperparameter is parameter from a prior distribution. It captures the prior belief before data is observed. So in case of your neural networks, so your weight and biases all are going to be a parameter, and then hyperparameter. Few of the hyperparameters that I had listed here is like your learning rate, number of iteration of a gradient descent, number of layer, number of neuron per layer, and this many like activation function. So these are the hyperparameters. These are basically user defined. So you have to, these need to be tuned like prior before we go for actual learning of this set of parameters. So this hyperparameter tuning, like in general, this hyperparameter tuning are very much iterative process where you will simply start with one idea, then you will code that idea, and then finally after coding you will implement, you will execute that, and then finally you will evaluate. And this is iterative process. So after evaluation, you will come to know whether this set of parameter is like good one, or we can get some better parameter. So this process you have to repeat. So this is one continuous process. So where you are starting with your idea, like your idea, like this is like how many layer that you should have, or how many neuron that should have at every layer. So this is your initial idea. So based on this initial idea, you are implementing this. You are implementing your neural network, and then finally you are experimenting to just check how well your network is working. And after that you are going for refine phase. So you are going to refine the idea and iterate this process. So after this you will refine, you will go for one more iteration, and you will evaluate that set of parameter, and if this is good, not good, then you will go for one, and finally you will come up with a set of hyperparameters. So to make this like this iterative process very much efficient, your training, test, and dev set is going to play very much crucial role here. So given this is your overall data is given to, this is the data set given to you. So this data set usually, like to iterate to this process, we usually divide this data into 3 sets, 3 groups. So this is your like test set. So you don't have to touch this set. This is going to be the future basically. This you are going to use only after your model training phase is over. So we divide our data in 3 sets. One is training, one is dev set, and one is test set. So this is dev set is basically a development set. So training set, like you are going to use this chunk of data to train your model, and this development set is going to, like you are going to evaluate. This is the third point, like you are going to evaluate your model on this dev set. And this like this is the iteration basically. After this is one iteration, you train on this one, you test on this one, then next iteration you will go, and then this iterative process will continue until you are not getting a tuned hyperparameter. And once your hyperparameter is tuned, or once your model is learned with this tuned hyperparameter, you are going to finally test on this test set. So this is basically when we have a final model, we evaluate it under the test set in order to get an unbiased estimate of how well our algorithm is doing. So this is the overall process. So now earlier days when we are having only a small amount of data, like a few hundreds of instances. Usually we are dividing our training, dev, and test set in this form. This is just a number. This is not a fixed number. Sometimes people may use like 70, 10, 20 kind of thing. So this is just a number. So we are dividing like 60% for the training, 20% for the development set, and then 20% for the test set. Sometimes you must have seen like people are doing this partition also, where you are having only training set and the test set. But now in this recent era, where we are having a vast amount of data, where our number of instances are not limited to 1,000, we are having millions and billions of instances. Usually for our deep neural network, in case of deep neural network, where our data set is very large, usually we go for this kind of division, where we take the major portion of the data for the training, and then 1%, this is just, once again, this is just a number. So, and 1% for the development, and this 1% for the test set. So this 1% is also very much large. This is not very much small. This 1% is also very much large. So this is how we divide our data in like for our deep neural network training process. So now once we divide our data, while division, we have to keep one thing in our mind, like this distribution of our test instances should be same, like distribution of test instances in the training as well as development and the test set should be same. Because if distribution is not like uniform throughout your training, development, and test set, what will happen? You will train your model on one set of distribution, then you will test on other set of distribution. Then definitely you are not going to get a good estimate of your model. So while dividing, one thing that we have to keep in mind, that we have to divide, or we have to divide this into like our data into like in such a way that these three sets have common distribution, follow same distribution. So now after like this training phase, after let's say that okay, now we have divided our data into training set, development set, and test set, then we go for our model training. So while model training, as I said, we have to evaluate our model on the dev set to see how well our model is working. So this is like, this is, take this as one example. So here, like you are having two set of points. You are trying to classify this set of points into two groups. One is like circle, and one I can say like multiple. So these all are basically your instances. And for this set of instances, you want to learn a decision boundary. So decision boundary can be drawn in many ways. So this is the decision boundary that you are looking for. And for this decision boundary, if you see this closely, this decision boundary is having low bias as well as low variance. So once again, this bias is basically expected difference between your actual and the predicted one. And your variance is basically expected variance of your prediction. So you are looking for this kind of decision boundary for which your bias means this prediction, expected difference between prediction and actual is like your bias. So you are looking for a model for which you are having low bias, as well as you are looking for a model for which you are having low variance. Low variance means, as I said, low variance is your expected difference between prediction. So for this model, let's say that expected variance between this prediction, is very much low. So hence I can say that this is just right model of the model that we are looking for. Sometimes we may come across a scenario like this. For this kind of, this is one, this is different like decision boundary that your model has. Right? For this model, you can see that this model is having low bias because you are predicting your training set, like all of the training data point you are predicting accurately. But this model is having high variance because, like, if you see this expected variance between this prediction is very much, expected variance between prediction is very much high. So if expected variance between prediction is very much high, your test error or generalization error is going to be very much high, because if you see this region, if you see this region supposed to be multiply region, but because you are capturing this point, this is one outlier point, you are trying to capture this point here. So what is happening? Your boundary is getting towards this side, that is this other point side. So whatever the test point that is falling into this region will also predicted as this circle point. So that's why your generalization error is going to be very much high, or in some sense you can say that your model is trying to capture the noise signal from that is there present in your data set, and hence your generalization error. Your model is basically overfitting. So you may come across two scenarios while you are going through that iteration. You may come across overfitting problem as well as underfitting problem. So in case of overfitting problem, your training error is going to be very much low, as in this case, but your test error is going to be very much high. In other way, you can think that your bias is going to be very much low, whereas your variance is going to be very much high. You may also come across a scenario like this, for which your bias as well as your variance is going to be very much high. In other words, your model is neither fitting to your training data nor your test data. So this is the few phenomenon, like few scenario that may arise while you are going through that iteration. So now, if you think about this overfitting, so if you are building a deep neural network, you are having, like, for your neural network, you are having many internal hidden layers, and for every hidden layers, you are having many neurons. So if your model is very much complex, so what is happening because of this complex model, that you are trying to capture each and every pattern that is there in your data set. Sometimes you may also, this complex model also capture this noisy pattern. So in this case, this is one noisy point. So your model also captures this noisy point, and hence what happens, basically you overfit. Your model overfit, and hence your generalization error is going to be very much high. So this is what overfitting scenario in your deep neural network. So few of the things that you usually use while implementing your deep neural network to avoid this overfitting phenomenon. One of them are regularization. So regularization is basically some modification. Is there any question? Okay. So few of the things that you can do while implementing in your deep neural network. One is you can go for the regularization to avoid overfitting. So regularization is some sort of modification that you are doing to your learning algorithm, in such a way that your generalization errors should be reduced. So sometimes you may also come across, like, sometimes, like, if you are going for regularization, you may see like scenario where generalization error is getting reduced, but sometimes your training error may increase. So this is okay. You don't have to worry about this thing. So you can reduce your generalization error even at the expense of increasing training error. So this is the phenomenon that I am trying to explain. So now if you see this figure, there are two plots is drawn here. One is blue line, and then other one is, you can see, like, green line. So if you implement and if you draw the plot of your cost function, you will see initially what you will see, your training as well as your generation error is getting decreased. So till after some point, or once you reach here, let's say that after that, you will see that your training error is continuously decreasing from this point onward. But at this point, what will happen? There is some sort, from this point onward, you will see that there is some sort of increase in this training, this generation error. So here you can think that, okay, now from this point onward, your model is trying to capture the noisy relation or noisy pattern that is there in your data set, and hence your training error is getting decreased. But what is happening because of this? Because you are from this point onward, you are also overfitting, because your model is capturing noisy point or noisy relation. So your model is also overfitting, and hence your generalization error is started increasing from this point. So from this point, this side, you are having underfitting, or you can, this is underfitting zone, where your model is neither fitting to training nor fitting to test data. From this point onward, you are having overfitting zone, like where your model is fitting to the training data, but your model is not fitting to your test data, or you can say in this case development data. And this is your optimal capacity of this model. So you need this one. You don't have to go stop here, or you don't have to go beyond this one. So you have to be here, or you need to have, you want to have your optimal capacity. You want to have a model with optimal capacity. To do this, sometimes we go for the regularization, or most often we go for the regularization. So in regularization, most common form of regularization is norm penalties. So if you remember your cost function in your deep neural network, so your cost function contained one term, that is loss term. So this is the loss where you are calculating the difference between your actual and the prediction. So along with the cost function, and this is what you are trying to minimize. This is the overall cost function that you are trying to minimize in your deep neural network. And here, in case of norm penalties, you are adding one more extra term to your cost function, that is penalty term over this theta parameter. So this basically, this is one sort of, you can think this as one regularization, and this is one regularization function that you are applying on your this theta per set of parameter. And this is the lambda, this is one hyperparameter. So this is greater than equal to be 0, greater than 0. So this is one parameter which controls the extent to which this regularization will be applied to your objective function. So this is the most common form of your norm penalty, and usually you must have seen, like you must have come across like L2 norm penalty, L1 norm penalty, and some time you must have also come across 2-1 norm penalties. So most often we go for L2 and L1 norm penalties. So in L2 norm penalty, we are adding a constant to the original loss function such that the weight of the network don't grow too large. So in this equation, you can see that if you are trying to minimize this objective function, you have to minimize both the things. You have to minimize this regularization or this penalty, as well as you have to minimize this one, this your overall loss function. Or you have to get a balance, I can say balance model, where both the things have been minimized. And most often we go for this L2 regularization. So assuming this theta, as I said initially, this theta is W1, W2 and bias it till WL and then bias it. So if we assume that our bias is 0, we don't have bias, then your this regularization L2 regularization can be written over this weight as like this is the most common way to write the L2 norm regularization, and this is basically a squared sum of each and every weight. So by what actually, once we are adding this L2 norm regularization to our objective function, we are just fooling the model. So we are fooling the model that such that it won't drive the training error to 0, which in turn reduce the complexity of the model. So what happened actually? Sometimes you must have come across a term like weight decay kind of term. So this L2 norm regularization try to keep all the weight on the same scale. Sometimes what will happen? Some of the weight may grow high, some of the weight may grow very small, or some of the weight will be very much small. So if some of the weight, like considered in this case, if this weight is very much large, then you are giving more importance to this feature and you are giving less importance to this feature. Hence you can see that like your model is going to be overfit and based on this one, and hence you are simply going to avoid or ignore the other feature. But so by using this regularization, you are giving penalty over this overall weight, and you are trying to bring all the weight to a normal range or common range or same scale, you can say. Similarly, you can also go for L1 norm regularization. As I said, like this is the most common way to write L1 norm regularization. So this is your regularization parameter where you are adding this L1 norm regularization, and this is like summation over all Wi, and this is mod basically we are taking. So sometimes like in case of L2 norm, we are just like giving, like we are penalizing high weightage, like we are penalizing some of the weight basically. We don't want our weight to grow very large. So the L2 norm penalty decay the component of vector W that do not contribute much to reducing the objective function. Whereas in this L1 case, this L1 penalty provides solutions that are very much small. So in this L1 case, we don't want all the weight to contribute. So few of the weight we want to have 0, and the few of the attribute we want to contribute to our model. So that's what sometimes you may also see, you must have seen that this L2 norm also like you use L1 norm to refer to a sparse inducing norm, or you can use this L1 norm for your feature selection also. Then you can also go for earlier stopping. So this is the figure that I had explained previously. So like in this figure, till this point, your training as well as your generalization error is getting decreased. But after this point, your training error will be decreased, but validation error is increased. So you can have a hard threshold kind of while you are going to train your model. Like you can have like, okay, if I will not prolong my training iteration from this point onward, or I can stop my training till at this point of time. So you can use various like way to stop your training process at this point. You can have your fixed number of iteration. Okay, you will train your model for a fixed number of iteration, or you can also have like, okay, if your training error is not decreasing like more than a user-defined threshold parameter, then you can also stop your learning phase. So this is one earlier stopping criteria that you can use to avoid this overfitting. Then the next one is dropout. This is one of the important thing that you should know while implementing your deep neural network. So I hope that most of you are aware of bagging approach that is used in traditional machine learning. So in traditional machine learning, we are like in bagging, I can say, you are taking multiple sample of the data, and then on each sample you are training a model. So if you are taking T number of sample, then you are training basically T models. And while testing, you are passing this test instance to each and every model, and then finally aggregating the output predicted by each and every model to come up with the final output. So this is how you apply bagging in your traditional machine learning model. So, but in case of deep neural network, where data is very much large and you are trying to train very much complex network, bagging approach is not suitable here. Like you can't run your deep neural network over multiple sample of the data set. So here simply to avoid this overfitting, let's say we go for this dropout. So you can think dropout as bagging applied to your neural network. So take this network. So this is I had just drawn with this three only. So usually your neural network are very much complex, having many hidden layers. So if you see this network is very much complex. So if this network is very much complex, having many hidden layer and many neurons, then this model will try to capture each and every pattern that is there in your data set, and sometimes noisy pattern also. To avoid this, we go apply bagging, or you apply dropout on this base network. So if you see this network closely, this network is just like a composition of many sub-networks, or this network contains many sub-networks in this form. And usually what happens if you in most of the machine learning case, we usually go for the simplest model. So, and this is very much complex, and this is composition, or this contains very much simple network. So in your deep neural network, most often we go for dropout to reduce this complexity of this network, or to avoid this overfitting. So let me explain why, or let me give the intuition why we go for dropout here. So just think this is one team. This complete network is one team. So where each and every neuron or each and every node has to contribute. And in a team, basically this team or this prediction or whatever the problem that you are just trying to solve using this network, if you are considering that problem as a team problem, then you want each and every node to contribute, or each and every element to contribute. Sometimes what happen, okay, sometimes in a team we think that like my partner will do work, and if you think that my partner will do work, then nothing will be done. But whereas if you think that okay, definitely my partner is not going to work, and hence what you will do, you will try to do better. So however, if you know your partner will drop out or will not work, then you will do better. And while testing, what will happen? Everyone appears. So if everyone appears while testing, then definitely your performance is going to get increased. So this is the overall intuition of your deep dropout in deep neural network. So while training, what we do, each time before computing the gradient, each neuron has p-probability to drop out. So if let's say that in this case, these are the neurons that has been selected to drop out. In every iteration, remember we are doing this in every iteration, or you can consider in every mini batch gradient descent, iteration of mini batch gradient descent. We are dropping each and every neuron with probability p. So you can simply think that okay, you are tossing a coin for each and every node, and if it is head, you are going to keep, and if it is tail, you are going to drag that neuron. So each neuron has p probability to drop out. If you are dropping this neuron, if you are dropping this neuron, you are basically going for a thinner network. And if you are going for a thinner network, then there is a chance that you will not overfit. And this model will not try to capture the very much complex relationship that is there, or noisy relationship that is there in your data set. So we are training with very thinner network in every iteration, and using this, like in every iteration, we are going for a different network. And but while testing, we actually everyone appears here. So while testing, no one will drop out. And if the dropout rate at training is 3%, all the weight times 1 minus 3%. Let me explain why I am saying all the weight should be 1 minus 3%. So consider this example. So this is your base network. You can think this is a base network. Now you are applying dropout on this network. So in every iteration, so this is 2 node difference, and then you are going to have 4 different networks. So consider that these are the 4 networks that you are basically training. In iteration 1, you are training this network. You are iteration 2, you are training this network. So iteration 3, you are training this network. Iteration 4, you are training this network. So if you train this network in iteration 1, and for this network, this is the overall output that you are looking for. So if you train this network, your output, like for this network, output is going to be this much. For this network, output is going to be this much. For this network, output is going to be this much. And for this, output is going to be 0. So as in case of dropout, you have trained 4 different models. And if you sum this output of each and every model, you are going to have like 2 times this W1 X1 plus 2 times W1 to X2. But what you are looking for, you are looking for W1 X1 plus W2 X2. And that's why what we do, we take half of the weight from this one once you are applying this dropout. So this we are taking half of the weight while testing. So this is the overall prediction that we get. Like while testing, we take half of this weight here, and finally our prediction will be look like this. So this is overall about your dropout. So you can think dropout as one kind of ensemble, where like you are just taking like you are training set, you are taking multiple set, and like this is your mini batch. You can think this as your mini batch, and on every set basically you are training one neural network. So if, in this case I had taken 4, then I had trained 4 neural network 1, network 2, network 3, and network 4. And while testing, why we are passing our test data to each and every neural network, and whatever prediction that we are getting for each and every network, we are just taking the average from here, and that is going to be our final output. So this is all about your dropout. So most often you will see this, once you are going for dropout in deep neural network, your performance suddenly get increased, or your model accuracy is getting increased. This is all about regularization. Few of the things that you can also do while you are in your optimization problem. So you can while optimizing, you can go for normalizing your input. So some scenario, like if you take any real world data set, you will have different kind of attributes. So sometimes consider like you are having attribute like weight, as well as you are having attribute like thickness of hair. So now if you'll see the range of weight and thickness of hair, this range will be completely different. For weight, range will be very much large, and for this thickness of hair, range will be very much small. And if your objective function, or in some sense cost function, is dependent or calculating some sort of distance, then your weight attribute is going to dominate there. And if your weight attribute is going to dominate, so simply you will ignore hair thickness attribute while learning your model parameter. So hence, most often we go for the normalization. We try to bring all the feature or all the attribute to a normal range. And in general, we had also, like it has already been proven that with normalized input or feature scale input, gradient descent converge very much faster. So this is what we do while our feature scaling. So this is M set of instances that we are having, and you can think that every instance is one D-dimensional. Every instance is basically D-dimensional vector. So or for every instance we are capturing the D attribute value. So while normalizing, what we do, we normalize each and every attribute. So this is one attribute, or this is ith dimension you can think of. For this ith dimension, most often we calculate the mean, and then we calculate the standard deviation, and we normalize this value here like the actual minus mean divided by unit values. So this is just you can think this like your attribute is going to be mean centered and like zero centered, having zero centered mean, and have going to be have unique variance. So this is the most common form of feature scaling that we do while implementing our deep neural network. So now the question comes, why? Okay, now we are doing feature scaling or we are normalizing our input. Why there is a need of this in our while training the deep neural network? You can think of, you just visualize this image as your deep neural network, and these persons you can think like these are the layers of your deep neural network. So in this, what is happening in your actual deep neural network? Something you are passing from here that is getting passed to this, then that is the output of this is getting passed to this, and this process is repeating, and finally you are going to get the output. But sometimes what happens? Just consider in this case, if you consider this volume of this mic is different at different hidden layer, or this transmission medium is different at this different layer, or mode of communication is different at different layer, then what will happen? In every layer, if you pass something from here, something additional will get added here, and something will get passed from here, something will get added here, or some sort of noise will get added because of this volume of this mic, or because of this transmission medium. So whatever actual data that you are trying to pass from this point to this point may not get actual reflected here at the last stage. So hence what happens? So most often we go for the normalization or one sort of standardization, that is like we normalize the input at each and every layer, or we try to bring the input to the common scale at each and every layer. So now before going for this normalization, let me talk about the batch, and then we'll talk about batch normalization. So this is your input, like this is, consider this is 3 instance. Using these 3 instance, you are going to train your deep neural network. So what you are doing, you are at layer 1, you are learning the weight, that is W1, and then with this W1 you are getting like one linear combination, then you are getting Z1, and this Z1 is getting passed to your activation function, and you are going to get activated. And this A1 is getting passed to this next layer, that where you are learning this W2, and this process continues. So this X1, X2, X3, you can think this is one batch, and this once you are multiplying, this is just matrix notation. We are just like using matrix notation for this. So you are multiplying this with W1, and finally you are going to get Z1, Z2, and this Z3. So this is your batch. You can think this as your batch. So now in batch normalization, what we do actually, okay, now we had learned this W1. So with this W1, we had got this Z1, Z2, Z3, and for this Z1, Z2, Z3, we are going to calculate the mu for each and every attribute here, or like if this is d-dimensional, then, and if W is k cross d dimension, then you are going to get like k dimensional data point here. So for this every k dimension, you are going to calculate this mu, and for every dimension you are going to calculate. So this, in this case, you are having 3, then the mu is going to be this much. And for every dimension, you are also going to calculate the standard deviation, that is sigma, and then sigma can be written in this way. And using this mu and sigma, you are going to normalize this Z1, Z2, and Z3. And this normalization is going to be like this one, that Z till I. So this is Zi minus mu divided by sigma. So here I had added one epsilon value. So this is just to avoid division by 0. This is very much a small value to avoid the division by 0. So this is how you can normalize your input at each and every layer, and then this whatever normalized input that you had got here, this will be passed to your activation function, and then your process will continue. So from this, using this mu and sigma, we get this normalized Z1, Z till 1, then Z till 2, Z till 3, and this will be get passed to your activation function, and then you will get A1, A2, A3. And for this A1, A2, A3, you will learn W1, W2, and then once again you will go for this batch normalization. So in general, in general, like setting mean to mu 0 and sigma 1 work for most of the application, but in actual, while you are going for real world application, we don't have to set mu to 0 and sigma to 1, or we don't have like means 0 centered or 0 mean data. We don't want, most often we don't want 0 mean data, and or data with a standard deviation 1. most often we can have different mean and different variance. So previously now we have got, we had normalized our data point in this way using this mu and this sigma. So while actual implementation, this normalized, we are going for different kind of normalization, and this is like different normalization that we are using while implementing your deep neural network to set different mean and different variance. So we are multiplying this, whatever normalized this feature vector that we had got previously, we are multiplying with gamma and then adding some parameter beta. So this is to set your mu and sigma to some different value. So now if you see your J is going to be a special case of this one. If you set sigma equal to be epsilon plus this sigma plus gamma equal to be sigma plus epsilon, and beta equal to be mu, you are going to get your actual J. So using this gamma and using this beta, you can have different mean center data and different data with different variance other than one. And these gamma and beta are your learnable parameters, so that you can learn using your gradient descent. So this is how you normalize, or you go for batch normalization while you are actually implementing deep neural network. So now this is all about training. Okay, while training you are having gamma and you are having beta, and then using this gamma and beta you are normalizing your input. But while testing, you need your mu and your sigma, that is required while testing. So but you are having only one data, and for this data this mu and sigma will not be available while testing. So in usually, like if while testing we don't have our batches at the testing time. So ideal solution is basically, okay, now whatever the training data that you are having, calculate the mu from your training data and calculate the sigma variance from your training data, and use that same mu and sigma while you are testing. But while actual implementation, we go for the moving average. So now in every mini batch or every iteration, you will have different mu and sigma. So just you are stored for every layer, you are stored, like in every iteration, whatever mu and sigma that you are computing, you just store that mu and sigma. And once your training gets finished, you go for the moving average for the mu and moving average for the sigma. And whatever the moving average that you get, you use that moving average for while you are going for the test. This is all about your batch normalization. So now, why this batch normalization works actually? So if you see this unnormalized data, for this unnormalized data, this scale in one dimension will be sometime one dimensional scale. This direction for this figure, this dimension, or for this feature, this scale is very much large, and for this dimension, the scale is very much low. And what will happen? You can't have the same step size, or you can't have same learning rate in both the direction. If you same take the high in this direction, you need to have larger learning rate, while in this direction you need to have a smaller learning rate. And what will happen while it will not normalize your data, and if you go for this larger learning rate with this in this direction, your optimization or your gradient will basically shoot up. To avoid this, what we do, we normalize the data and bring this basically, this is asymmetric basically. So after normalizing, we make this like our objective cost function curve will look like this one, and this is one symmetric curve. So for this curve, your scale in each and every direction is very much same. So that's why we most often we have seen that after normalizing, our gradient descent is working very much faster. So while optimizing, you may also come across your vanishing gradient or exploding gradient problem. So what happened actually? Sometimes your cost value get increased or become very much large, and if your cost function value is very much large, your gradient is going to be very much large. So while implementing or while training your deep neural network, you may come across like vanishing gradient and exploding gradient problem. Sometimes gradient will be very much slow. So if gradient is very much slow, the convergence will be very much slow, or more iteration is required to train the neural network. To explain this concept, just consider this example. For this example, only two features that we have taken. One is x1 and the other one is x2, and this is the network that I am trying to train here. And for this layer 1, the weight that I'm trying to learn is W1. For this layer 2, I'm learning again W2. Similarly, for layer L, I am learning here WL. So for this neural network, I am making some sort of assumption for the just simplicity of explanation. I am assuming that there is no bias term at every layer. So bias is 0 for the simplicity of explanation. And at the same time, I am also assuming that this activation function is linear. So if activation function is linear and there is no bias, your Z1 or output from this layer will look like W1X. So this is Z1 is going to be the output of this layer. Similarly, for layer 2, output will be Z2, W2, Z1. Similarly, for layer L minus 1 and L. So your L minus 1 basically, ZL minus 1 is going to be WL minus 1, ZL minus 2. And finally, the output of your neural network is going to be WL multiply ZL minus 1. So this is when I am assuming there is no bias or bias term is 0 and the activation function is linear. So if you further simplify this y bar, it can be written as this one. So here simply I had expanded this ZL minus 1. So this ZL minus 1 I had replaced with WL minus 1, ZL minus 2. And then this ZL minus 2 I had replaced with W2, Z1. Sorry, WL minus 2 and ZL minus basically. Here I had replaced with WL minus 2, ZL minus 3. So this ZL minus 2 has been replaced with WL minus 2, ZL minus 3. And this further I have simplified, and this y bar after simplification can be written like this one. So now, assuming the entry like this is all your weight matrix, and then finally you are multiplying with this x. So now if you assume, okay, this all the weight matrix are in this form, like WL minus 1 to W1 is in this form. Like you are having a diagonal, you are having P, and then non-diagonal, you are having P. You can have something here. This is just for explanation. So this, with this notation, this your y bar can be computed like this one. So if this, like if you assume that your weight matrix in this form, then y bar can be computed like WL multiply P to power L minus, this matrix to power L minus 1 multiplied by x, or this L minus 1 time multiplication. So this is how you will calculate your final prediction using the weight W1, W2 to WL minus 1. So now, if this P value in this, okay, now you have calculated your y bar, and if assuming this P is greater than 1, if this P is greater than 1, then this y bar is going to be very much large. Okay, and if this P is less than 1, then this y bar is going to be very much small. So this is what is written here. If P greater than 1 and the number of layer in the network is very large, or this L is very much large, then the value of y bar will explode, or this y bar value will be very much large. Similarly, if P is less than 1, the value of y will be very much small, and hence the gradient will take very much tiny step. So if this is the case, and if this y bar is very much small, your gradient will take very much tiny space, a very small step in every iteration. And hence what is going to happen? Your training iteration is going to will get increased, or you need more training iteration to complete or to train your deep neural network. So this is all about your exploding and vanishing gradient problem. So how then the question comes, how we are going to avoid this vanishing gradient and exploding gradient problem? So we go for the random initialization. Most common way is to initialize the weight randomly. So if you initialize the weight randomly, you will break this sort of symmetry. So you will have some value greater than 1 and some value less than 1. So you will, to break this symmetry, we usually go for the random initialization. So this is like random initialization is one way you can avoid these two things, vanishing and exploding gradient problem. And the other one is, most often we don't go for the sigmoid function. Most often we don't use sigmoid function, because this sigmoid function here, if you calculate the gradient will be very much less here. Okay, you will have very much tiny step. You will take very much tiny step at this point as well as at this point, and hence your convergence is going to be very much slow. So most often we don't use this sigmoid function. Most often we go for the ReLU1 in our deep neural network. So for this new deep neural network, your gradient is like common everywhere. And then once you touch this one, your gradient is going to be 0. So why, like, then if you go with this one, what will happen? You will have this gradient computation is very much fast. And for this, you will have, like, once you reach here, you will have your gradient 0, or you can, after reaching, like, you can say that, okay, then you know much more improvement in gradient, and your algorithm can terminate very much early. So hence your vanishing gradient problem will also get avoided once you go for the ReLU in place of sigma. So now think about this deep neural network where you had used ReLU as your activation function. And once you reach here, once this A value is, or this Z value is 0, this touches this here, your gradient is going to be 0. So if this is the case, what will happen? Most of the non-performing unit will get removed from your deep neural network, or most of this gradient from this non-performing unit will not be counted while calculating. And hence what is going to happen? You are going to have more thinner network. And if there is more thinner, if you are having more thinner network, what is going to happen? Your gradient at this point will be it will not be very much small. This gradient will have some sort of magnitude. So this is how this ReLU works better than this your sigmoid function, and why you should go for the ReLU when you have a choice of selecting ReLU as well as sigmoid. So there are many other variant of ReLU that you can use. One is like clicky ReLU, where like once you are touching this, in the ReLU case you are making this gradient to 0, but once you in this clicky ReLU you are multiplying this Z with, in this region you are multiplying this Z with 0.01. So that you want to trade your model slightly further, you can think of. And then you can have other variant of ReLU. You can have parameterized ReLU, that in case of 0.01 you can have this, you can in this region you can have your A equal to be alpha Z, and this alpha is going to be learnable parameter. So this is how there are many other variant of, like there is S ReLU, and there are many other variant of ReLU, so you can use while implementing. Then the last one is like some few tips that I would like to share while related to that your actual optimization algorithm. So if you think about your AR circus or your cost function will be look like this one. And assuming, if you assume, okay, there are two parameters W1 and W2, and that these two parameters you are going to learn, and if you are assuming like that is theta is going to be W1 and W2. So now this is the actual place that, or this is the optimal point that you want to reach while you are training your deep neural, or you are training using this gradient descent. So initially what you do, you start with some random theta, and at this theta you calculate your gradient. So and then what you do, if your problem is minimization one, you go to the negative direction. From this point you go take the negative direction of this gradient. So that's why we are computing the negative gradient at theta 0. So that is this one, and this is your cost function. Okay. So now from this point, what you are doing, this is how you are calculating the theta, or this partial derivative of this cost function with respect to W1, and this partial derivative of this cost function with respect to W2, and finally you are going to get the gradient. And once you got the gradient, you are taking the negative direction of that gradient, and finally you are just multiplying. You are taking a step size eta here, and using this step size you are moving from this point to this point, that is the new point, that is theta 1. And once again you are here at this point, you are taking the negative direction of the gradient, and with this eta step size you are moving to the other direction, that next point theta 3, theta 2, and this process repeats continuously, and then finally you will reach to, or your algorithm will converge to some minimum. So this is how your actual gradient descent works. So this the advantage of this gradient descent is that if your cost function is convex, you are going to, this gives guarantee to reach to the global minimum. And if your cost function is non-convex, then this converges to the local minimum for this non-convex error surface. But the cons of this drawback with this gradient descent problem is that it is very much slow. To compute this gradient in every iteration, you need to have all your data points, and then only you can compute this gradient. So this computation is very much slow. And this is also like this, you can't go for this gradient descent when you can't load all of your data point in the main memory. So in this case also this gradient descent algorithm will not work, because this calculation of gradient, all the data point need to be in the main memory. So this is the drawback with your gradient descent approach. This is the same thing that I am explaining. For this computation of this gradient, if your n is very much large, your time, overall computation time is going to be big over n. And if n is very much large, this your gradient descent algorithm is going to be take very much large amount of time. So usually what we do, we go for the mini batch gradient descent, where we take batches from our data set, or we divide our data set into different batches. So we basically have different batches of this data, and in every iteration we are going to train with one of the batch. So we randomly initialize theta 0, then we pick first batch, we take this first batch, and then with this first batch we calculate our cost function. So for this first batch we are having L5 and L4, so that's why we are calculating this cost function related to this one only. And then with this we are going to update our parameter theta, and then finally we pick that. This is all we are doing in iteration 1. In iteration 1 we are calculating, like we are taking the batch 1, with this batch 1 we are calculating the theta cost function value, and then this, based on this cost function value, we are going to update our parameter theta. Then in the next iteration we are picking the second batch, and then we are repeating doing the same process with the second batch, and then finally what is happening, we are repeating this process for every batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4. And this process, what is happening, this is one approach of your, or one iteration of, you can think one iteration of your mini batch gradient. So now here this is one approach. So after this completion of this one, once again you will go for this batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, and updation of your parameter theta 1, theta 2, or parameter W1 and W1, W2, and bias. So this is how your mini batch gradient descent works. So this mini batch gradient descent, don't it force you to have all the data point in the memory. Hence it can work when you are having a system with less memory or less main memory. And then this converges very much faster compared to your gradient descent. And this process, as I said, this process will repeat until you go for the convergence. Now there are three scenarios that may arise that is related to your mini batch size. One is like, what will be the value of your mini batch, or what will be the size of your mini batch. If your number of point is m, if number of instances are m, and if you are taking all the point in one batch itself, then you can say that okay, you are running a batch gradient descent problem when m equal to b, when batch size is equal to be m. So when you are taking all the data point in one batch. So if you go with the batch gradient descent, your cost function will look like this one, or more traceable, I can say. Like you will see that your cost function is continuously decreasing. And in some case, let's say that if you are taking your mini batch size equal to b1, this you can think, okay, this is other variant of your gradient, that is stochastic gradient descent, where each training example is its own mini batch. So if you are having m training data point here, then you are going to have m batches here. Similarly, if you are taking mini batch size to in between 1 to m, so that is going to be a mini batch gradient descent. So that is like if you plot your mini batch gradient descent cost function, your cost function will look like zigzag kind of thing. It will decrease, but sometimes it will increase and decrease. So this zigzag will be there. Finally, it will decrease only. So this is why, because like if you are going for this cost function calculation, so for mini batch 1 cost function value will be different, for mini batch 2 cost function value will be different, and hence you are going to have this zigzag kind of notation. But in general, this mini batch performs much more faster than your gradient descent. And there are the various, like you can also tune your mini batch size, or you can consider mini batch size as one of your parameters for the tuning. So this you can go like while training your neural network, you can go for your mini batch gradient descent. So this is all about, I think this is all about today. So in today we have initially started with regularization, and then we gone for we had talked about normalization, and then we will talk about gradient. There are many more things that you can do while you are implementing neural network. Like there are many other of activation functions that you can try out. There are many other gradient variation of gradient function that you can try out. So there are many other things that you can do, or you can implement by actual like solving a particular real world problem. So Krishna sir, this is all about today. So is there any question from audience?
Yes. Thank you, sir. If audience wants any question.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
If I have to train my data using some other deep learning approach, say about Boltzmann machines, so all these parameters will be considered in the
Most of the things like normalization and all the things will be there for your other variant. Like if you go for either CNN or if you go for RNN, you see your normalization and all the things will be there.
And about activations.
So like for different like neural network, you are having different activation function. So in your Boltzmann machine, I am not aware about your activation function, but you can definitely have multiple way of like using your activation function. And
For
while
classification application, for classifying data set in different classes.
So for that, we have to see what are the available activation functions are there. So you can definitely try out various activation functions while you are training your deep neural network.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, in the case of robotics, when we apply this deep learning neural networking process, the possibility of making all functions are properly aligned, or we can expect any error in processing the data in the case of robotics by through neural networking system?
Can you repeat your question one more time?
No. If suppose if we are applying this artificial intelligence deep learning system for robotics, for deep learning process, say for example for doing any functions, is there any error, possibility of error occurrence in programming, neural networking programming, and failure of doing this such type of function programmed work by the robotics?
So no, I have got your question partially. So your question is much more related.
No, can I explain it again?
No, let me.
Yeah.
So you're talking about maybe while implementing, you must have some sort of error.
Yeah.
So how to avoid that? So for this, you can have like different kind. You can have different kind of checking. You can check your cost function. You can check your you can go for gradient checking kind of thing. So there are many debugging things that you can look for while you are actual training your model. So you can go for the debugging and all to see like in every iteration whether your like whatever like required output that you want, or whatever the output is required, whether this is coming or not. So you can go for the debugging kind of.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello, sir. I have a question.
Yes.
Yes.
Sir,
Continue.
as Professor Prabhu said, that how we can do all these things, and your answer is by doing debugging.
No, the
Hello?
previous question was much more related to what will happen if our actual implementation is wrong.
Yes, sir. But you said debugging is debugging is a solution, one solution to that problem.
No. What actual like? I think the last question was that related to like you are implementing. Let's say that you are coding your deep neural network, and some point of time, some like you need to add or you need to subtract something, but by mistake you had added in place of subtraction. So how we should trace these kind of things, because this is one error like error in implementation. How we should trace this one? So that's why I said to try this one, you need to go for the debugging.
Okay, sir.
Any
Hello,
other
sir.
questions? Yes.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes,
Yes,
Uh,
yes, you can ask.
so while training the model, you are talking about using normalizing the data.
Mhm.
So while testing the data, do we normalize the test data as well, or do we denormalize the model that we
No,
have trained?
we normalize our test data. I think you have missed one point where we had talked
Yes, I
about
was. I
moving
missed
average.
that.
We had talked about because while testing time, your batches will not be there, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if you see the ideal scenario, okay, so you need mu and sigma at each and every layer of your deep neural network. So one way, like, okay, whatever the mu and sigma that you are getting, you take average of that one, or you take mu from overall data set, training data set, or similarly you calculate sigma for overall training data set. But in practical, what we do actually, we go for the moving average based mu and sigma calculation. So actually we store like whatever mu is that we are getting in every iteration, we store that mu as well as sigma in every iteration at every layer, I can say. And finally, with the set of mu and sigma, we go for moving average calculation, and we view that like whatever moving average mu and sigma we get finally, we go use that mu and sigma for while testing our model.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, one more thing. For implementing quantum neural networks, have you some idea about?
No, I am not aware of. I had not yet started this quantum one, so definitely I may not able to answer question related. So I think some of the session, like some expert are there from quantum, so you can ask your question, related question.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Vikas sir.
Yes.
Hmm. Can you hear me?
Yes. Shall we conclude? If
Yeah,
no
yeah.
more, questions, shall we
Yes,
conclude?
yes. If no more questions there, then we can conclude.
Okay.
Any participant want to ask anything?
Okay. I think none of them have any questions, so
Okay.
we can conclude.
Okay, so thank you very much, Vikas sir, for nice delivery of the lecture. And in the coming time, we also expect some lectures from you. So this is over for today, and tomorrow we will start the session at sharp 10 a.m. Okay, so kindly join before 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Please submit feedback form before leaving.